So just a little bit of housekeeping. Unfortunately, Ogumah Duke Peltier is unable to join us today for the panel. He sends his regrets. He had to take an important meeting today. However, of course, that is the risk that we take inviting leadership. So they're always being pulled in many different directions for very important reasons. I want to acknowledge that we have many members of leadership from various communities in the audience here. And I want to acknowledge Chief Nelson Toulouse of Segmuk. And for those of you in the room here, we do have some refreshments. I know a lot of you have seen those and enjoyed some of that as well. They're along the side wall. We are live streaming this event on Facebook. So welcome to those of you on Facebook who are joining us today. We are going to be recording this event so that it will be posted on the University of Sudbury's website afterwards. And just a quick mention that we got some interest from Queen's University radio station CFRC, and so we are going to be sharing the audio from this panel with them for their Aboriginal Voices show that they're going to break it up into segments and share it with their community as well, which is really exciting that we're getting that kind of attention for this. So moderating our panel discussion is Dr. Kevin Fitzmaurice from the Department of Indigenous Studies, and I'm going to turn it over to him and Elder Art Patatagoose. Dr. Fitzmaurice will introduce the panel, and I'd like to invite Elder Patatagoose to start us off in a good way.
Before I write up this much, I'm going to share with you part of the beginning that we participated in Thunder Bay back last fall. I traveled up there as part of a small group from our community to attend the opening of this particular session. And when we arrived up in Thunder Bay, we noticed that there were no signs indicating that that spirit fire had been lit. So in traveling down to the community, we sat down there, and they were preparing to have a sweat lodge. But they had not yet lit up that spirit fire. And Dean Sayers, Chief Gimel from Balloting, questioned why there was no fire. And he sat down and chatted with me. And he said it's sad that it had not yet been lit. So we chatted for a brief moment and decided that it was the right step to begin. Because we heard stories from the community members that they were getting this idea of the runaround. No one was wanting to give them permission to light up that fire. And I said, but Dean, we don't need their permission. We only need the permission from the host community, Chief Gimel from Thunder Bay. So we searched for him, tracked him down at the golf course, and we asked him for his blessing from his community to give us that permission to light up that fire, because we were in his home asking for him to give his okay. So we went through that exercise of getting that permission from the host community to go ahead and light that fire. We went up to the courtyard of the court, found a suitable place, gathered the materials together to light up that fire, and we did. So in initiating this kind of an action, taking that kind of step, to assert yourselves in your own home. That's important that that not be forgotten. So when we gather like this here, when we bring out our sacred items, we're saying to our Creator, I am proud to be your child. You gave me instruction about how to live, how to care for our families and people. And my parents always impressed upon me that where we live, it's a sacred place. And we're having to be mindful of that in the way that we live. So those grandfather teachings that we see being written and being placed on labels and hung up everywhere is not something to be put out, it's something to be placed in. And my parents are telling me over and over again, I can't teach you if I don't live what I'm teaching to learn. So they were my first teachers, my first role models, and my father and mom. They didn't go to those residential schools. They didn't go to those day schools. But they did suffer from that pressure from that Indian Act. But my father never lost his idea of being free. So this afternoon, or this morning rather, when we gather, I'm going to speak more to that during my time at the mic. So I'm going to light up this smudge here to let the Creator know, Jim know, that I'm still here following his instructions about what to do and how to live. But I also want to acknowledge my good friend over here. In that line. And my good friend over here. Yuma, Toulouse, and Sagamuk. I rely on them in helping me to better understand and to carry that Anishinaabeg sense of being, because they hold on very strongly to their language. I have bits and pieces, but I have lived in a home where we were Anishinaabeg, not Canadian, but very strongly knowing that we are Anishinaabeg. These two here, this one, Miigwan, Miigwech, this one, Shishigwan. How come this one is feather and this one is feather? They don't look like feathers, this one at least. But this one was given to me by Gema Waliwakagijik. I used to sit with him when we gathered. But inside here, that sound, and you say shishi one. Where do you hear that? And where do you see that? In the evening, when the ducks come, you hear that whistling from the flight of that bird. That's the sound that you hear, say shishi one. Whistling from the feathers of that bird. Because you can't see him, but you hear in the darkness, in the light, that sound. You hear Jim Duman talk about that first sound, that first thought coming into this world. How did we get here? Why are we here? Those questions are inside that word Anishinaabe, Anishinaabeg, and the answers are in the word Abanoji. Those two, they fit together. That helps us to remember, to understand this idea about what it is and who it is that we are. My father explained that to me one time when I was sitting down with them. He and Jim Luchdai at home had gone out fishing, and both of them took some tobacco. They walked down to the shore, and both of those old men, they knelt down beside the lake and they put their tobacco into the water. They were showing me and reminding me about where we were in the home of our Creator. So this one here, that helps us to link with that understanding. So as soon as that spark comes from this fire, there's an energy that goes out. Instant. But our heart tells us it's moment to moment. It's a spiritual life that we are living. Today we are looking at a linear sequence. Time past, time future. Time of beginning to time unknown. But that kind of time we can space in between our fingers. It's moment to moment for each of us. So your experience is very distinct and unique to you. And when we think about what it is that we do when we pray, there's no separation between who I am and who you are. That's so difficult to comprehend, come to know. Up in Hollowater, where they talk about having challenge, facing all kinds of devastation, destruction, community, Anomi, complete 100% destruction. How do we get back to healing? It's this kind of a medicine that we need to ground us again in understanding who it is that we are from the Anishinaabeg view. The judge in a court case here struggled with that, but I can appreciate the challenge because she took an oath to uphold and honor the law of Canada, and she took her office. I haven't taken that kind of an oath to Canada. And I haven't taken out that Canadian citizenship card. It's like I'm prisoner in my own house if I want to travel to that international community. I want to acknowledge that I've still got this freedom. The international community will acknowledge. And there's some challenge there because Canada tries to block them. And I see that as being a great interference in my life, in the nation of my people. Taking that away, I'm sorry, it's not for you to take. That's what's so important to us, for us to understand. So here, when I light up this one, that's what I'm doing. I'm saying to Canada, I'm saying to the world, I will continue to be in Anishinaabeg, because that's who I am. So I'm going to share this one. This one here, and sing that Thunderbird song. Thunderbird, we ask to come and watch over what we are doing, and to guide us on our journey, to send into our mind those good thoughts, bring into our heart, and good feeling, so that we are prepared to do this work on behalf of our future generations and our people today. Because it's for them that we do this work, not for ourselves, although we will benefit perhaps in the short term. But it's for that future generation to come that we provide this gift, that we can hand it over to them, in the hope that it will be green, sustainable, not sustenance, so we take a meager portion to provide for our own keep, but to live in a relationship of harmony, which is sustainable from generation to generation. So this one here is going to help us keep that. Yo, hey, da, we are, we are, yo, hey, ha, we are, yo, we are, we are, we are, yo, we are, yo, we are, we are, we are, yo, hey, ha, yo, yo, we are, we are, we are, yo, hey, ha, we are. Yo, we are, we are, we are, yo, we are, yo, we are, we are, yo, we are, yo, yo, we are, we are, we are, yo, we are, we are, yo, we are, we are, we are, yo.
So, Ani. Bonjour. Kevin Fitzmaurice Indigenous Cuts, in Swakopmund, Donjaba. Jaganash, the weekend in Simama, Mishnabe, Niniinda. So, Bindigan, welcome everybody here. So we've got a very busy morning, lots to do. I want to begin by saying Chimigwech to Sarah for pulling all this together. Amazing work that you do. A lot of it's in the backgrounds, and I just want to say Chimigwech for that. Also, Chimigwech Art for opening in such a good way today and setting a really, really good energy and tone for us in our discussions and our questions. And also, of course, Chimigwech to the panelists, all the panelists, for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules and for being here. So I want to begin with a bit of, well, I'll tell you what the agenda is for today. So I just want to begin with a little bit of bios and background about the case. And then what we've decided to do is to have opening presentations from the panelists. Not too long, though, about 5-10 minutes or so, depending, And we want to move right into questions, right? And so for those of you who don't know me, I teach in the Indigenous law and politics stream here, as well as theory and a few other things. But that's my focus. And so in one of the courses that I'm teaching, Canadian politics and law and Indigenous people, and I see many of my students here. Actually, we've been working really closely on this case, and we have a few introductory questions from my students. I actually asked them on the last quiz, what would you like to ask the panel? So we have some of their questions, which we'll work with, and then we'll turn it over to you for your questions. And so we do have roughly 2 hours in total for this. And so if we need to go, I'm not sure where Sarah is, but if we need to go over a little bit, maybe we can do that if we have questions. I'm not sure. That's Sarah's decision, I guess. Okay, so I don't want to, right. So just a little bit of background about the panelists. So Art Patatagus is a member of the Tigimikshing Anishinaabe, retired professor specializing in Anishinaabe culture. He has served his community as a Gima council member. He's viewed by the Tigimikshing as an elder. I was employed by the Tigimikshing community in multiple roles, including claims research. He's a student of, he's schooled in Anishinaabe cultural practices and then worked in the profession of urban planning as a project leader. Art continues to work as a consultant and lecturer, assisting Indigenous nations and peoples to protect rights and interests. Gima Valerie Richer has recently been elected as Gima of the Tigimikshing Anishinaabe. Congratulations, in 2018. And then she has a background in law, governance, and human rights. Prior to becoming Gima, she was a sole practitioner running her own legal firm and served as a part-time member on the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. She was also previously legal counsel for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the Assembly of First Nations, and the now defunct Indian Claims Commission. She received her Bachelor of Law from the University of Ottawa and her Bachelor of Arts from Laurentian University. She's a member of the Indigenous Bar Association and is currently a non-practicing member of the Law Society of Ontario. The Honourable Stephen O'Neill at the end. Stephen's legal career spans nearly 39 years. He has dedicated his career to working as a judge in Northern Ontario and to working in private practice for First Nations. In addition to serving 16 years as a judge on the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, he has been general counsel and has worked in land claims, mediation, and negotiations. He has experienced firsthand how mediation and alternative dispute resolution can contribute greatly to the settlement of long outstanding claims and disputes. He is looking forward to constructively assisting in mediations and alternative dispute resolution processes involving the Crown, industry, and Indigenous people. Stephen graduated from the University of Windsor and spent 22 years in private practice before becoming a judge in 1999. He was a past executive member of the Aboriginal Law Section of the Canadian Bar Association and a past member of the Canadian Judges Conference and the Ontario Superior Court Judge Association. He has written extensively on First Nations issues, and he has also spoken in various venues across Canada with respect to Indigenous and Crown relations and in reference to the fundamental importance of the principle of reconciliation. Stephen is married to Shirley. Is Shirley here today? No, she's not. And they have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. Anybody?
Change that to 6 now.
6. Got to update your file.
That's an old file.
In his spare time, he enjoys canoeing, running, and cross-country skiing. Okay. Mike Ristoul is third here in the row. Mike is a citizen of the Nipissing First Nation near North Bay, Ontario. He lives with his wife, Brenda. Is Brenda here today, Mike? No, Brenda's not here. Nipissing, just west of North Bay. Mike served on the Nipissing First Nation Council for 17 years. Prior to that, he was a volunteer on the board of directors at the North Bay Indigenous Friendship Center. After working for 31 years in the railway industry in North Bay, Mike joined the staff at the Union of Ontario Indians at Nipissing First Nation for a further 11 years. During this period, Mike worked as a volunteer with the Robinson-Huron Treaty Chiefs at the Robinson-Huron Treaty Annuities for over 26 years. He continues to work for the treaty today. Currently, he is the chair of the Robinson-Huron Treaty Litigation Trust Fund, having been appointed by members of the trust in 2010. The trust was mandated to bring the annuities case to court. So we have a very, very knowledgeable panel here today. So we're very, very lucky. Miigwech again for taking time out of your busy schedules. So just they've asked me to do a little bit of background to the case. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just maybe some key points and some key quotes from the case. So just a little bit of background. The thrust of the lawsuit concerns the 1850 Robinson-Huron Treaty, specifically annuity augmentation. The 21 Robinson-Huron chiefs argued the annual $4 annuity paid by the Crown per treaty member has not changed since 1874, 24 years after the treaty was signed, despite a commitment that the annuity was increased as revenues generated on the territories increased. Originally, the annuity was $1.60 per treaty member. Okay? So there has been a long-standing political effort to have the annuities increased. And this has been ignored by the government, by the Crown, by the government. A quick quote from Chief Dean Sayers from Batchewana First Nation in the Sudbury Star in the December article, I feel is helpful to give it a little bit of background to the case. To begin the quote, it was discontent about mining activities by settlers without the free, prior, and informed consent among the Lake Huron Anishinaabe that forced the Crown to enter into a treaty relationship to get access to the lands and resources they coveted. Unfortunately, the failure to honor the treaty promise meant the discontent continued and will continue until the case is settled. This decision is the first step to having the treaty enforced to deliver a sharing of the wealth that our ancestors negotiated. So through the creation of a litigation fund, the chiefs representing 21 First Nations involved, which now have 30,000 total members. This question is now before the Ontario Superior Court. So in July, it all began in July 2016. The process began through a notice for summary judgment in Thunder Bay. And the case is proceeding in 3 steps. And now I believe we're finished the first step. So the first step was this. Does the augmentation clause represent a legal obligation over which the court can exercise judicial authority? Is this case judiciable? And I'm going to get into that, but yes, it is. Yes, it in fact is. But the second stage of the case is where the Crown then brings forward technical cases as defense, or reasons for not dealing with the case, which the Crown is liable. And then the third step then is this question of quantum of financial obligations that then date back to 1874. So in her first response in December, Justice Hennessy wrote, and it's a quote, "I find that the Crown has a mandatory and reviewable obligation to increase the treaty's annuities when the economic circumstances warrant. The economic circumstances will trigger an increase to the annuities if the net Crown resource-based revenues permit the Crown to increase the annuities without incurring a loss." So, quote, "The principle of the honor of the Crown and the doctrine of fiduciary duty impose on the Crown the obligation to diligently implement the treaties, promise to achieve their purpose, i.e., of reflecting the values of the territories in the annuities, and other related judicial duties." So Justice Hennessy also wrote that the 2 sides need to sit down and negotiate the terms. Okay? So what is also interesting about this case, about the first decision in December, is that the parties put the Anishinaabe and Euro-Canadian perspective before the court through 18 witnesses, 11 qualified experts who all filed extensive reports, sometimes representing years of academic study and investigation. There were also 4 elders and 3 chiefs that contributed submissions to this case. The collection of material filed may well be the most comprehensive collection of historic and cultural material ever amassed on the making of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, or the Robinson Treaties, including the Superior Treaty, and the life and history of the Anishinaabe who occupied and were active on the north shore of Lake Huron and Lake Superior in the 19th century. This is the last thing I want to say in terms of introduction. The role of Anishinaabe law and legal principles presented at trial was part of the fact evidence into the Indigenous perspective. The plaintiffs did not ask the court to apply Anishinaabe law. Rather, the plaintiffs and Canada submit that the court should take respectful consideration of Anishinaabe law as part of the Anishinaabe perspective that informs the common intention analysis. So that's just a little bit of background of the case. I invite the panelists now to make opening statements or introductory statements. And please, if I've missed anything of importance, please you can compliment what I was saying as well. And then after the openings, we'll go to the student questions, and then we'll open it up to for everybody to ask questions. So,
I made some notes, so it's a little bit easier for me to stand here to read them. I want to start by saying miigwech to our elder Art Tagus for opening us up in our discussion in a good way this morning. And the reason I got to go first, Sarah asked me, miigwech Sarah, was to do the territorial acknowledgement as well. And I think territorial acknowledgements are really important because they're not only an opportunity to welcome people to the territory, but also a reminder of the original people that were on this land. So Hayden King said it's also, an article I read just a few weeks ago, said it's a good opportunity to breathe life into relationships. So I think starting off with a territorial acknowledgement is really important. I was I had part of a short discussion last week with somebody, and they were asking me about what to include in a territorial acknowledgement, and he proceeded to name off all the nations that live here today. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's not like bowling. You don't get more points for knocking down pins like by naming off all the nations that live here today. That's not what it's about. It's about an acknowledgement. It's about reconciliation and acknowledging the Indigenous people that lived here prior to settlement. And it's very important. And so I want to commend Sarah for making sure we do the territorial acknowledgement. The next thing I want to say really carefully is that my comments this morning are my own. I accepted the invitation to speak this morning for educational purposes only. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not practicing at the moment, and I am a chief, but I didn't get permission of all the other chiefs, Robinson Huron Treaty chiefs, to come and speak today. We actually have spokespeople that we agreed to amongst the chiefs, and I'm not one of them. So I want to make sure that I'm not making any official statements today, and it's really hard to speak publicly, especially when you're live on Facebook and recorded in the midst of litigation. So I'm going to try to be careful what I say, and I want to clearly say anything I say is not an official position. It's just something I'm contributing as part of my discussion. So to start, just with a couple of comments I want to make in terms of opening statements, and it was something that Elder Art mentioned this morning about not being a Canadian citizen, and it's the whole question around Canada's legitimacy as a nation state. And I would really like to encourage students and scholars to really think about that, because there is no explanation in law that explains how Canada became a nation state. We're Indigenous kids grew up highly politicized, and so I knew from a very young age, and a lot of our children know this as well, but we never lost a war, we weren't conquered, we weren't asked to join Canada. Don't even mention the words terra nullius to me. And the way the Supreme Court talks about it is they say assumed crown sovereignty. But we don't know what assumed crown sovereignty means. And so I encourage those scholars and students to think about, if you're doing a thesis or some sort of study, to give some thought to what assumed crown sovereignty means and how Canada, an explanation for how Canada today is a nation state. And I think that leads into a discussion on treaty, because it's one of the things that gives legitimacy to Canada, and it gives legitimacy to settlement, and it gives legitimacy to settlers. And you have to look at that as a case-by-case basis in terms of the treaty, but in terms of the Robinson Huron Treaty, there are definitely rights that are given to permit settlement here. And that was the mutual sharing of lands and resources. And so along with those rights also come responsibilities. And for very many years, it was a one-sided kind of arrangement where The Crown had said, we will reap the benefits of this sharing and allow the development to occur, but you get $4 a year. And that's not the intent of the treaty. And so, and I think it's really important, and I'm happy to see so many people here this morning, it's because we not only have rights from the treaty, but we all have responsibilities. And your participating this morning shows that you're taking the responsibility seriously, because you're interested in having this kind of discussion. And so I think some of the responsibilities is to understand what the treaty is, and this morning is a good point for that as well. Know and respect what those territorial boundaries are. Understand what it means to share in the land and resources. Educate yourself, your friends, your children. I think it's really important for children that grow up in treaty territory, but grow up anywhere, to really be instructed in terms of what are the responsibilities that you have for the lands that you live on. And so in terms of this area, children should know what are their responsibilities in terms of the treaty. I was really disappointed a few weeks ago because Barry Sinclair was supposed to come out. And so I think, about the important work that he's done, and of course, in terms of the truth and reconciliation work that he's done as well. And I just want to read you one of the TRC calls to action. Actually, it's written in there twice. It says to renew or establish treaty relationships based on principles of mutual recognition, mutual respect, and shared responsibility for maintaining those relationships into the future. And so I've said before that I think we're all treaty people. If you're living in this area, you're a treaty person too. And we need to remember that. But the other thing we need to remember is that the treaty, it's a sacred, it's a sacred treaty, and the reason it's sacred is because it was conducted in ceremony and with forward looking in terms of future generations, and we should never forget that, and we should always celebrate that. We were on a call last week, and somebody on the call said, how come we don't have a monument to our treaty? Which is true, and I think, and I feel a little guilty about it, but it's on my bucket list to make sure I go to the place where the treaty was signed in Sault Ste. Marie, and I encourage other people to put it on your bucket list as well. And at the very least, we should have a monument there. Anyway, that concludes my opening comments. I want to say welcome to Otikmeksheng and Anishinaabe territory and Robinson Huron Treaty, and I look forward to a discussion with all of you this morning.
I'm going to take Valerie's lead and I'll just get up to the podium. I don't like to stand on the podium because it kind of it reminds me of Donald Trump. And I don't want to be there. But because I have some notes, I've been like Valerie, I've got some notes. And Valerie's opening kind of scared me a little bit because she talked about all these things about not saying things that, throw out a legal understanding, or, the understanding of the chiefs, and the understanding of the community. I'm the same way. I'm here as an individual to help people understand all of this big story about the treaty. So what I like to do before I start is I like to invoke the ancestors. And the way to do that, I've been told by the elders, is to introduce yourself in the language. I'm not a language speaker, but I'm trying. Ha bojo, Anishinaabe. Bojash Dijnakas, Nibi Sing Don Jiba. Shiken Do Dem. My name is Mike Restool. My Ojibwe name is Muskrat. I'm from Nipissing First Nation, and I'm of the Turtle Clan. And I'm hopeful that my ancestors especially, but all of the ancestors who might be in the room here with us today, because Art lit the sage and the smoke hopefully attracted the ancestors to come and join us in our talk here today. So that's why I like to do that, and I like the ancestors to know who I am, especially my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and on my mother's side, all of that. Anyway, I'm here before you today just as an individual. I just want to talk to you a little bit about my understanding of what the treaty represents and what the case represents as well to me. As you know, First Nations always held that treaties were formed relationships among nations. And Indigenous people in North America always formed relationships amongst each other before the coming of the Europeans to our land. And when they came, when the settlers came, they began to form relationships as well through friendship treaties and all of these kinds of things. One of those was the what we've referred to as the Covenant Chain Alliance, which was established in the 1600s. And that alliance said that we would help each other. You know, because we're from different nations, we wanted to help each other. So it was in the form of a ship that was tied to a tree. And my friend Peter Recollet here, who is the vice chair, is with us here today from the trust, taught me this. So I'm using his words and I'm stealing a little bit of his knowledge to tell you. Anyway, about this Covenant Chain Alliance. And what happens there, because of that alliance, the understanding is that if you tugged on that rope that was tied to the ship, European settlers would come and see what's wrong with us, what we need, and we would renew the relationship. And that's how it worked. And the other way around, if the settlers tugged on the rope, they needed some help from us, and we reciprocated. I'll talk a little bit more about those words as we go along. So it was based on that. The Royal Proclamation understood that. The king understood that when he issued his Royal Proclamation, and he said that there's Indigenous people living in these lands, and that they own title to this land. At the same time, what I don't really like is that he was establishing sovereignty over the lands that we lived in, or he was attempting to establish the sovereignty over the land. But anyway, in that proclamation, it stated that the crown would be agreeable to create those treaties. And if they wanted to use the land, if they wanted to own the land, is what their idea was. So they relied on terms such as just and reasonable, and that the natives or the Indigenous people should not be molested, things like that, and that formed the basis for making a treaty from their point of view. So following that, then, Sir William Johnson called all the natives to Niagara, where the Treaty of Niagara was negotiated. What happened there is that Sir William Johnson, on behalf of the Crown, said that they were going to respect us as title owners in our land. Not only Anishinaabe, but also Haudenosaunee and all of the other tribes that are in North America, at least in Canada as we know it today. So the treaty at Niagara sought to reinforce the relationship that started in the 1600s from the Covenant Chain. The treaty belt was synonymous or symbolic of the strengthening of that Covenant Chain. So after all of those wars, then the Crown decided that they were going to create this relationship with Indigenous people in North America, at least in Canada, because they had gotten defeated by the Americans, and so now, anyhow, what happened then? The War of 1812 began. the British Crown knew that they needed the assistance of the Indigenous people. They needed to protect their sovereignty in what is now Canada. And what they did is they tugged on that rope that was tied to the tree, and the Indigenous people reacted. They came to the assistance of the Crown in the War of 1812. Chief Shinwakons and Chief Tegaunene, I don't know if I pronounced that word properly, Tegaunene, those two chiefs were awarded medals after the 1812 war was over. And that was in about 1849 that they were finally recognized that they were the two of the key people that helped the Crown win the War of 1812 against the Americans. So that was fine. Then all of a sudden, what happens? Some mining activities started on the north shores of Lake Huron and Lake Superior. And Chiefs Shinwakons and Tegaunene and Nebenegoching, these are the chiefs now in these areas. These are the recognized leaders here. And they're saying, what's going on? You told us in 1764 that you weren't going to run over our land, that you were going to make a treaty first, and now you're taking over our land, you're sending people in here. And so anyway, big thing happened, and I'm not going to go through all the history of all of that stuff where they put Shinwakons in jail and all of that stuff. I'm just going to say that because of that mining activity, talk started about a treaty. Vidal and Anderson were two men that were appointed commissioners by the Crown to investigate who were the people of the North Shore, Lakes Huron and Superior. Vidal and Anderson report basically set down the things that needed to go into a treaty, my understanding. From that, William Benjamin Robinson was appointed the commissioner for negotiating a treaty with the Ojibwe. You know all this stuff. I know you know all this stuff, and I'm just running through it, but I'm getting to a point, so bear with me. So the RHT Treaty was signed in 1850, and it represented a continued relationship between the Anishinaabe and the Crown. And it was based on 4 principles, really important principles. And I'm going to echo the words of Chief Valerie when she talked about this, and a lot of other people. Responsibility, respect, reciprocity, see, I'm stumbling over my tongue now, and renewal. Those are 4 key principles that always were in the minds of the Indigenous people as they made treaties with the Crown. They always used those things because they were important to maintaining a relationship. So the Anishinaabe began to, because the treaty was not renewed, because the Crown did not reciprocate, because they didn't show any respect, and they just ignored their responsibility toward the treaty. What happened? In 1874, they said, $4 is the limit, guys. That's all you're going to get. Because we made a treaty with you, and that's what you're going to get, and it's forever and a day. We said, no, wait a minute. The bargain was, if you gain more revenue in the territory, you'll increase that annuity. This grievance started really way back in 1851. In 1851, Chief Shinwakons said to the representatives of the Crown, wait a minute here, we see all this activity happening in our territory, this mining activity, but you're not increasing the annuity. It's still at $1.60, I think it was, somewhere around there, $1.67 maybe. I can't remember the numbers. But anyway, that grievance started at that time, and it was over the years, over a century, that the leadership of the Anishinaabe continually said to the Crown, you have to honor the promise made. You have to renew the treaty. You have to respect us. You have a responsibility to us. All of those things. So all of that came into a court proceeding. We took a long time before we could put together a case to a court. It wasn't easy. Getting 21 communities, 21 chiefs together on a process to bring a case into court. And besides that, most of all of those First Nations have money to operate their communities with. But it's money from the government that is given to the First Nations to run. So they couldn't take some of that money and use it for a court case against the benefactor or the person who's, the person who's giving the money. So they had no money. They had no money. So when we said, well, how are we going to work at this anyway? So anyway, in 2010, the chiefs decided to accept a proposal from the legal team and the trust. The trust put together what they call a trust indenture. Let's create an organization that will in itself have the mandate to take the case to the court. Also, to find the money to take the case to the court. So that's what we did. 21 trustees were appointed, one from each of the communities, to work together to put together a trust indenture that would be the vehicle that we would use to take our case to court. That's what we did. My understanding. I don't know the legal aspects of it. I rely on the lawyers for that. So that's what we did. Then we went out and we went to banks to try to get money to fund our case. Only one bank stood forward. And that bank loaned us money, and we started our case. We started our case. We had the money. We had the background. We had the experts. Our legal team, thank goodness for them. They put together an awesome team of elders, experts, and chiefs to put together testimony, to put together evidence of our position. Our, how can I say it, perspective of what the treaty is. We went to court. The Anishinaabe perspective was very important for us to bring that into the court. We needed the court to understand that. That was key to us winning this court case. An Anishinaabe perspective was based on language and customs. Language was very important because in 1850, all of those people weren't versed in English. They didn't know how to speak English. Most of those chiefs didn't know how to speak English. All of the crown representatives didn't know how to speak Ojibwe and Anishinaabe. So that was important. That discourse between people of different languages, that was very important. We relied on the elders to teach that. We had some very good elders in the court that taught us that, how that process went. The other thing is we had experts and indigenous people that told the court about Anishinaabe law. That was very important because we were guided by Anishinaabe law, putting the treaty together in 1850, and it's still valid today. And those people who have that knowledge came to the court, gave their evidence, and we were successful. So all of those terms, those pieces, those laws, those concepts, those ceremonies were all very important in putting the case together. So on December 21st, 2018, a historic day, we won the case. It recognized the Anishinaabe perspective of the treaty. That was extremely important to me as an Anishinaabe person. The judge had the responsibility of choosing the common intention of the parties to determine if there was a legal requirement for the Crown to increase the annuity. She talked about respect. She said that the Crown had to respect the jurisdiction of the Anishinaabe over the territory, their authority to sign the treaty, and their relationship to the land. In terms of responsibility, the Anishinaabe people put forward evidence to show they have responsibility to their people, to the land, all the animals and all the plants, because Anishinaabe people have a connection to the land. That was important for the court to understand, to be able to make a determination here in the court. And then somebody brought out a really good story in my view. Dr. Heidi Stark, who's an Anishinaabe from, I think it was Wisconsin, pardon me if I make an error here. Dr. Heidi Stark told the court a story about an Ojibwe woman who marries a beaver. And that was basically a relationship issue between this Anishinaabe woman and this beaver, and showed how the Anishinaabe people were connected to the beavers in the land. But it had such symbolic reference that it was really a telling tale, and it really helped the judge, I think, make a decision here on the Anishinaabe perspective of the treaty. So the chiefs brought all of this to the treaty at the time that they signed, and in terms of reciprocity, I still have trouble with that word. Reciprocity. Sharing back and forth is what I like to use. Dr. Dribbin, on behalf of Robinson Superior Treaty, brought in some evidence to talk about reciprocity. He testified that the Anishinaabe had recognition of gift giving. He talked about the way they recognized gift giving, exchanges in relationships, accepting that gifts given are to be returned. And that's an important part of the treaty, that gift giving or that reciprocity. Renewal, the relationship is an ongoing relationship. The judge said this, and she recognized that the Anishinaabe people were saying this, that it's an ongoing relationship. It wasn't a one-time deal in 1850. It was a relationship that was ongoing. And since the time of Sir William Johnson and the covenant chain diplomacy and all of that, it was necessary to continually renew the treaty. It was a process, not an event, Justice Hennessy said. Robinson treaties descended from the covenant chain, she said. The parties intended that they would both thrive in the changing environment. These principles were fundamental to the ongoing relationship between the parties. The Crown's terms such as just and reasonable and all of those other ones in the Royal Proclamation, Robinson used those principles when he made the treaty, and he said he would deal liberally and justly with the Ojibwe people. So all that approach was to show respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and what was the other one? Anyway, you know who it is. I forget easy. You know, I'm an old guy, so I forget easy. I forget. Did I have lunch yesterday? Anyway, the treaty promise is that Justice would say that we would discuss the treaty from time to time, and we would look at how the annuity should be increased. That's what should have happened since 1850 to today. It hadn't happened. Justice Hennessy, in her decision, made it right. We are so happy that this was done. We will get a fair share of the Crown net revenue in the territory. And the duty of disclosure and consultation, just as Hennessy said, is very important in resolving this. That's the point where we are today. We are at disclosure and consultation. We're going to try to settle this amicably between us and the Crown. Miigwech.
Honorable Stephen O'Neill.
I'll keep my remarks as short as possible. I'd like to echo the words and acknowledgements from Sarah and Chief Richer, and of course the words from Elder Art and our previous speakers as well, Mike and Kevin. It's important to understand, folks, that we are in a litigation setting. As we speak today, there's meetings in Toronto, I believe, between all of the parties. Perhaps they're looking at exploratory steps. Can we move from Justice Hennessy's decision? Is there enough there? Is there impetus, direction? Is there enough energy there to have the three parties, as Mike Restoules tells us, to work towards resolving stage 2 and 3 through mediation, negotiation, and the final settlement? So it is a bit of a sensitive time because we all come here with our own views. These are my views. I don't speak on behalf of the legal team, and I don't speak on behalf of the litigation trust. But this is all about education. It's about a search for justice. And thank you for receiving our words with some of the restrictions we were required to put on them. I had a friend that used to say, get rid of the notes, Mr. O'Neill. So I better get rid of the notes. That's pretty good.
Feel good.
Speak from the heart, Mr. O'Neill. I didn't write this down coming in here, but 25 or so years ago, I was in this library and at this beautiful Northern Ontario University, and a man walked in with a cane and he had only one leg, and I thought, what's going on here? Who is this guy? Well, he was in World War II, lost his leg, still rode some horses down by Ottawa, was in the countryside, drove into work to the Supreme Court every day, wrote a couple of decisions. His name was Brian Nixon. That's pretty good. So he spoke to us 25 or 30 years ago, and he was the Chief Justice of Canada, Chief Justice Brian Nixon. And in 1990, he wrote these words in the Sparrow decision. This is his opening sentence. Check it out, see if I remember it word for word. For many years, the rights of the Indians to their lands, hyphen, certainly is legal rights, hyphen, were virtually ignored. What a courageous statement. How he could go back 100 years and say the legal rights of the first peoples of this territory, Turtle Island, were virtually ignored. What a courageous statement. A man passed into the spirit world in December 2016. But he wrote some words in May of 2015. Here's what he wrote. And here's my take here. He said, he wrote these words on May 5th, 2010, correction. If the grievances are old, that does not mean they are invalid, nor that they are stale. It simply means that justice has been delayed. And therefore denied. Part of the compensation may be for delay. Some elements of any settlement are intangible and spiritual, but the fact that they are hard to measure does not mean they must be ignored. So I want to conclude with this, my friends. We understand the painful history of this country. We've come to understand through the Royal Commission report of 1996 and the Truth and Reconciliation report of only a few years ago, the painful, painful history and the ignoring of legal rights. But here's what I say. I say we can no longer accept in this country the legal maxim, justice delayed is justice denied. I say, as a former Superior Court judge, and I've been in legal practice 42 years, I gotta tell you, it feels about 89 years. Cut that part out of the tape.
We're live.
No one should settle for waiting too much longer. Too many generations of people have passed to the spirit world. We understand that Justice Hennessy made a decision. What right does anyone have to delay resolution by another 100 years? Nobody. Why don't we delay resolution for 50 years? Sorry. Let's cut that in half. We'll really speed it up. 25 years. We got a 25, we got a 25, I got a 24. Here's a 24, I got a 23. I say, justice delayed is justice denied. We're at the moment of truth. And we need to try within the Canadian justice system, either through litigation if it must continue, but I'm sure everybody would agree that the best way to resolve this moving forward is mediated talks and negotiation. I was asked on CBC on Friday, what do you think, how many years? That's a hard call, but I would just say this, give the process its respectful time. Is that a year? Is it is it 2 years? A year or two, maybe 3. But people have waited far, far too long, and justice delayed is justice denied. Rich, thank you. Oh, those were kept. Those were kept.
Thank you, sir.
So I've got a bit of a different problem, I guess. Not problem. My students often ask me, would you please use some notes? Right? Where are the notes? So I'm going to stick close to my notes, okay? Because I want to be very, very careful about the questions that we ask. And also, I think we're comfortable now. We have a sense of the disclaimer, right? That all of our panelists are speaking personally and not representing the organizations or the nations in which they are members. And so they're enjoying, maybe, right? They're enjoying the academic freedom that we like to enjoy here as faculty and as students. So I think that's great. And again, these questions have been drafted by the students as part of a conversation in class, and also as responses to a specific quiz question that I asked them. And so to ask this question, I want to look carefully at my notes, and I want to just give you a bit of a background to it. With a view to the principles of the honor of the Crown and the fiduciary duty, it would seem that in deciding to increase the annuities payment in the 2018 Restule and the Crown decision, the court has sided with only one aspect of the Indigenous treaty discourse, that being the treaty as ongoing political relations of sharing and renewal. The very first line in the decision reinforces the Crown's long-standing position on the treaties as instruments of land cessation and surrender. And this is the quote from the very first line of the actual decision. In 1850, at Bavating, near Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the Anishinaabe of the Upper Canada Lakes region signed two historic treaties with the Crown, the Robinson-Huron Treaty and the Robinson-Superior Treaty. That provided for a land, quote unquote, and that's my emphasis, a cessation of a vast territory in Northern Ontario. This, of course, contravenes further considerations of Indigenous treaty law, namely that the treaties are nation-to-nation relations based in mutual political and territorial sovereignty as an ongoing sharing of the land within a legal context of peace, respect, and friendship, perhaps best articulated within the Anishinaabe expert witness submissions in this case, as well as within elders' teachings and current Indigenous scholarship on treaties, right? So this, submissions within the text of it, as well as the teaching of Indigenous scholarship on the 1764 Treaty of Niagara. I wanted to be clear about that. So this limited perspective of the Crown is reiterated throughout the decision with reference to the Royal Proclamation as the legal basis of Crown sovereignty through the establishment of a process that both recognizes Indigenous title to the land while committing to a treaty-making process of land surrender to the Crown in exchange for negotiated treaty entitlements. Okay, so that's the background. So the question from the students is this: does this only partial recognition of Indigenous treaty law concern members of the panel in that accepting an increase in annuities now within the context of this language of surrender and Crown sovereignty will most certainly make it harder to address these larger treaty questions at a later date? So that's the question. And who from the panel?
I think I'm supposed to answer that question. Is it best we just sit and answer it?
Sure.
Perhaps we should have the microphone. I brought the question up on my phone and I have it in front of me. The very first sentence of Justice Hennessy's decision, as Kevin said, uses the word session. Here we are, a 132-page decision, and in the first line the judge says, in 1850 in Boating near Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the Anishinaabe of the Upper Great Lakes region signed two historic treaties with the Crown, the Robinson-Huron Treaty and Robinson-Superior Treaty, that provided for a land cession of a vast territory in Northern Ontario. This brings back to mind those words, cede, surrender onto Her Majesty or His Majesty the King, all rights, title, and interests in the lands. And a lot of language like that shows up in the pre-Confederation treaties before 1867. This was one of them, these were two of them, or treaties after 1867. So the worry was, and the students have asked the question, we're already into a paradigm where the judge is telling us it's a cession. But I just wanted to remind everybody that in drafting the question before the court, there was really only one question. And that is the firm that was involved in it, the firm of lawyers, the question really was, the plaintiffs moved for a declaration that, considered apart from the pleaded defenses based on statutes of limitation, res judicata, laches, and acquiescence, since 1850, here's the question, the Crown has been and remains legally obligated under the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 to increase the annuity under the treaty from time to time if the territory subject to the treaty produced or produces an amount which would enable it to do so without incurring loss, and that the size of the increase of the annuity is not limited to an amount based on £1 per person. One question, there were a few sub-questions, very narrowly written, very narrowly asked. So in fairness to the students, it's a good question around session, and perhaps there are other adjectives that can be used other than session. But I want to assure everybody here, and I think everyone that has read the agreement, rather the reasons, would understand that that was the opening sentence of a 132-page decision, but ultimately the decision was about question 1, narrowly framed, about an increase to the annuities. It wasn't about surrender, it wasn't about extinguishment, it wasn't about cede surrender to Her Majesty or His Majesty. And so, despite perhaps the use of that term, the narrow question was before the court, and as Mike Ristula said, we're very happy with how that question was answered. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So now let's see. We have a bit of a follow-up question too related to that. And again, there's a little bit of background to it.
Do you need this, Kevin?
I think I'm on. Am I on?
Yeah, use the mic.
I should use the mic. Okay. Sorry,
There's another one on
Steve.
the table. There's a second one on the table. Can you grab it?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
From yourself,
Sorry.
just unclip it
Oh, thank
if
you.
you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody hear me? I'll just use the other mic. I'll just use it. Okay, so that's good. We're good? It's okay. Yeah, we'll just use it. All right. So let me just see a little bit of a background then to the follow-up question.
I want to know who the student was that wrote that question.
Oh, it was a discussion
Okay.
essentially that we kind of framed it. Okay. So background. Sorry. So this is in the last Robinson-Huron Treaty panel. Honorable Stephen O'Neill referred to a particular case, the Chippewas of Sarnia, Ontario Court of Appeal Decision 2000, which traced the importance of the 1763 Royal Proclamation to the 1764 Treaty of Niagara. In terms of the Crown's need to respect Indian lands and enforce the proclamation's provisions. So, in particular, in Article 56 of that decision, the meeting at Niagara and the Treaty of Niagara were watershed events in Crown First Nations relations. So the treaty established friendly relations with many First Nations who had supported the French in the previous war. It also gave treaty recognition to the nation-to-nation relationship between the First Nations and the British Crown, Indian rights in their land, and the process to be followed when Indian lands were surrendered. And so again, there's this conflation. So the students had a real problem with this. It was the conflation of the Treaty of Niagara and the Royal Proclamation in this way points to the appropriation, or possible appropriation and recontextualization of Indigenous treaty-making law of nation-to-nation relationships to the service of Crown understandings of treaties as including the possibility of land surrender. Based upon long-standing Indigenous scholarship of elders and knowledge holders' teachings, the Treaty of Niagara and the Royal Proclamation are two very different approaches to legal political relationship building and reconciliation. And so the question is, are there concerns when bringing Indigenous law into the court system in terms of possible misinterpretations and misappropriations? Are the courts an appropriate place to share Indigenous law and pursue treaty interests? So that's the question.
Thank you, Kevin. When I first read the 5-panel decision of the Court of Appeal in year 2000, I was sort of happy to read that phrase. It's the first time that the Royal Niagara Treaty ever came into Canadian law, especially in Ontario. But the students have asked a very good question, because the third paragraph, or the third sentence in that quote says, the process to be taken up when Indian lands are surrendered. Where did that come from? How did that get into the Court of Appeal in the 2000 decision? In that decision, there was less expert evidence into the court. If you read the decision, you'll see how some of that evidence came in. I want to assure everybody, in my opinion, And you know when you really make it your opinion, in my respectful opinion, or in my super most amazing respected opinion, or I'm just gonna knock this right out of the park. Like this is it, man. This is like, what was I saying anyway? So anyway, if my friends Peter and Hans weren't here, I would be, and Ray here, I'd probably be a lot more funny. But Alan Corbier testified in this case, covenant chain relationship to Roe Wampum, the amount of tremendous, not a Treaty of Niagara evidence that went into this court. There's a big difference between Justice Hennessy's case in 2018, with respect, than there is in a decision that is almost a generation ago in the year 2000. And the second part of the question, so it's this decision actually breathes life into the understandings and what Niagara brought and how the relationship was built. The second part of the question is, are you bringing Anishinaabe law into this case? Is there a danger that a non-native court under a kind of a colonial structure could take our Anishinaabe law and teachings and somehow filter it through, and we don't understand what the end result is? And as Mike spoke, I want to assure everybody the Indigenous laws, legal orders, and perspectives were only brought in to not to have the judge say, this is Indigenous law, or this is how it weighs out, or this is what it means. It was only brought in for perspective. What is our perspective on the treaty? Why were we there? What were the agreements we were trying to make, as Mike talked about, respect, renewal, reciprocity, and those important perspectives. So Anishinaabe law was not up for pronouncement or decision by the judge. It was brought in, Kevin and the students, simply to help the judge understand the Anishinaabe perspective at Bowating in 1850. I guess the last part of your question is, should we be going into these courts in the first place? I remember paddling once. It was a long day, and I guess hadn't drank water, and my mind was really way out there. And I thought, I had a dream. I walked into the Supreme Court of Canada, and it's a land claim issue with a treaty, and there are 9 Anishinaabe justices there. They were Anishinaabe justices. I thought, oh, okay, I wonder how that would look. And then I found my paddle floating in the water, and picked it up, and we all keep dreaming. So the point is this. It's not the first place Mike Ristool and these people wanted to be in this case. This wasn't your first choice. And you hope that this will end with mediation and negotiation. Everybody does. But this was the structure available, and a deliberate, informed choice was made. And I think everybody in this room that's read that decision and took part in that case would agree that they were showed the utmost of respect by the Canadian justice system. So much rich for that. Thank you.
Which, the third question is, do you believe that the chiefs at the time would have signed a treaty whereupon they give up ancestral land for a non-increasing sum of currency? What would have been the difference in the treaty had there been perfect understanding of intentions and circumstances? And who of the panel might?
No, it's
Do you want me to read it?
My voice into there, into the picture. What you are hearing from our guests here is exactly that opinion. As a nation, I was a young boy, 1978. We walked through history. 1763, Great Britain defeated France in a war. might say global war. As a result of this victory, Great Britain became the lead bully on the block. And in their proclamation that was issued, that was made clear. They sent the message to the world: I have intentions of expanding my empire. And if you try to stop me or have other pathways, I'm going to be expanding my empire in North America. If you try to block me, then you had better be prepared to go to war with me. That's the kind of threat that was put out there. But when they came to our people, they were dependent upon us. If you go back and take a look at the historic record of that time, Britain used its empire, the pathways where it set up colonies, and recruited people from those different far lands to man its armies. In 1759, around that period of time, our people entered into a second migration because our people were being subjected to some of this strange and dangerous illnesses that were coming to North America. We experienced that. So our people left the Montreal corridor. Today, when you go down to that corridor, you take a look at the community of Oka. The community of Oka is a Mohawk community. But why does it have an Anishinaabe name? The Anishinaabe name is there because it's Anishinaabe territory. The land was allocated to the Mohawk, the Six Nations Confederacy, for their loyalty in defending their British crown. But our people were threatened because we had also participated in joining forces with France. Our people were placed in the position of fighting among ourselves, and our people said, no, it's not our war, it's not our place. But feeling the threat from an army coming into your community that's losing its people because of illness, they migrated. They left Southern Ontario. And this is what Peter Roches came to share with us when he came back this way to share the teachings of the medicine scrolls, the birch bark scrolls. He left. And they took with them the teaching that we have, that we see being talked about today in the Medewan lodges and other places. But we kept alive the teaching. Okay? Here, in this particular location, you are on unceded land. This is unceded territory. It's looked after by the Anishinaabe from Atikameksheng. Because at the time of 1850 also, in that period, we did not know whether or not our sister communities would ever survive. So we took upon ourselves the responsibility to look after our own communities. And it's through that kind of a inward look that we start to become influenced by that outside world in terms of the way that it thinks. We start to grab on to concepts which are foreign to us. Ownership of land, title in property. Those are foreign concepts to us. They're not translatable into our language. So when we think about this pathway in coming down that trail, 1763, 1764, we make that covenant agreement. And one end of that chain from that 64 covenant agreement is tied around the neck of the Queen. We just have to give it a minor tug. And the Queen is going to come because she has obligation that she entered into a relationship with us about living together in harmony. We gave them permission to come into our territory to live. Our law. We didn't impose upon them because we said to them, you have a responsibility to uphold and maintain your own law because you require that to survive. But you do not come and impose upon us your law and your way of living. We will continue to hold on to what we have been given by the Creator in terms of our customs and practices, our language. That's what we keep. We don't impose upon other people. We have a concept that's been coined, doctrine of non-interference. And we don't impose in relationships among men and women, families, people. The sacredness of your individual living, your life that you possess, is so sacred, so blessed, that we have a responsibility to enable that to continue. That's the nature of our law. So when we think about going into that court, as I said at the first panel, we recognize that that court is political. We want it to be apolitical. Because we enter into a court which is foreign to us. And we need it to be justice. That's why we say justiciable. When we go into that court, is this the proper place to be? Is it going to bring us the measure of justice that we see being required to settle dispute? In this particular case here, we didn't participate as much as perhaps we might have. Because we gave direction, and we took direction from the legal team about procedure, pathway to follow. Because they're looking at a very, very narrow picture. The augmentation. Is there an obligation on the part of the Crown to increase the amount? And the judge said yes. That was a beautiful judgment. Taking a real risk in going into that court and come out with that words being applied in the affirmative for us is a major achievement. It says that we can go to that court and not have to worry about becoming lost as a people. That's what we want to see from the court. When we walk in there, it doesn't matter which law is brought in there. There's going to be this idea of a moral foundation, which is going to trigger the guide. Shouldn't have to be. Is it English? Is it French? Is it German? Is it Anishinaabe? In the mix, we don't become lost. We don't become second. Because that's just evil. And that's what our people put our faith in. When you are here, you are in our house. We don't become second in the line. That's in that ethnocentric mind. So when you take a look at all that language that has been brought here, we look at sovereignty. We look at manifest destiny. We look at radical title. In behind that kind of language is couched white supremacy. That's what we confront. It has no place in our home. Our law is very clear. And that's what's inside that word Abanoji. Abanoji says, the child that's born is sacred, it's innocent, it's pure. It doesn't matter where it comes from. That's its nature. We have a responsibility to provide for that care, to keep that condition and state, the grace of it. That's what we do. That's our law. So that's a high measure to achieve in looking at how law carries a community. That's what we have. That's what we have to share. And we want to see that within the judgments coming from the courts, that this is the path they're following, so that we can feel welcome there. We can go into that house, go into that court. But there's two worlds here. Our Anishinaabe world, we keep that one. That's what's inside our language and so precious for us. It gives us a way to see. It gives us a pathway to the future that all the world needs. We keep that one. We have that obligation to ourselves, the duty to ourselves, and the responsibility for that to hand to our children. I'll share that with you. You got you.
I'm just wondering, I should maybe put this to the panel. We have a few other questions, right, which the students have prepared, but maybe at this time we could go to the audience, people here's questions.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We're kind of moving to noon. So is there anybody here that would like to ask a question of the panel? Yeah? Okay. Pardon me?
I'll get it. I'll bring it
I just covered it all. It's good to open it up.
in. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me into your territory. My name is Roger Giroux. I'm the president or chief of our new family organization, INFO, Indigenous Nipissing Families of Ontario. And we are, like our elder said, from families that moved into the Yoka, come back, and we wish to belong to your territories, and we wish to be a member of this area. And I think we're going in the right direction. And I really like what you said. And the one thing that my question is, you said we were talking about monies and getting recognition and getting more, but also Robinson Huron Treaty, I'm asking is how do families like myself and my new community connect with Robinson Huron people, and how do we become or belong part of the Robinson Huron Treaty? I mean, you've talked about court cases, but you haven't talked about other people wanting to join the Robinson Huron Treaty area. I think we feel we belong here, because I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't feel that. It comes from many mixed families in my generation, and I think that how do we actually connect with you now? Is there a way? Is there a system? Because you're working and you're fighting for Anishinaabe people, but also what about the mixed people? Could be Métis. I'm declaring myself Indigenous. I could be Métis. I could be Nipissing. I could be Algonquin. Kootenai. How do we mix? How do we meet? How do we now can work with you and you can work with us? Because I think that time has come for that. Because we're not just Métis, we're Indigenous. And we feel that, and we want to become one, not tri-nations. Is there an answer to that? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I'll tell you my perspective, and somebody else can join on. But it was like I was saying in my opening comments is I think that if you're living in this territory, you're also a treaty person, and so I had some suggestions of what that meant in terms of not just rights but responsibilities, and learning about the treaty and developing treaty partnerships. So I think I recognize that there are some Métis groups in the area, and I haven't had any contact with them, but I do consider Métis as brothers and sisters, and I think it is time we start to have discussions amongst each other. But that's the only thoughts I have to share this morning.
Okay, there's another question here.
I've got
Give him an answer.
Oh, sorry.
We'll give you a more direct answer. In our language, we have families, okay, that are coming from this kind of a mixed heritage. We talk about the term Lapitch. Lapitch says this one doesn't belong. Coming from this kind of a mixed background. This is where we see the influence of that foreign church, foreign law, foreign way of thinking. And we defined it with the application of this name, Lapitch. So when we go back to our teaching in being an Anishinaabe, as I mentioned, the term Abanoji, what we are forced into. I asked a student one time when Peter Rochis was here visiting with us. I would ask him the question about being a nation. And Peter's response to that young man at the time, in talking about being a nation, he says, when I become a nation, I have to be carrying that military weapon of that rifle. I started to walk around like that tin soldier. Because that's what it means when you become a nation. It's the way that we put divisions in between people that creates that you're going to be kicked out because you're not pure. That's what we see inside the Indian Act law today. It's still there, very real. My blood is not pure enough to be passed on to my children. Especially where there's a mix of marriage among nations or among ethnic groups. Our people don't put those restrictions because our law is quite clear. When we look at what's around us, I go outside and I see that birch tree. Those are nations. The pine tree, those are nations. The bass fish, those are nations. Our perspective is quite different in the way that we look at the world. Because we see ourselves as being connected directly with every single one, which is different. The diversity is something that we appreciate, we prize. We cherish that. So when you're put on the outside because you're not carrying that pureness, because that's what that Métis term implies, that you don't meet the standard of being human. You're incomplete. There's something wrong with you. I say, it's nonsense. We have to get rid of that kind of thinking. But it's a long way to go because we see the world today living in that kind of lifestyle along those various places. And those people are coming here from all nations of the world, all reaches of the world. They're coming here into our home. And those doors have been opened to welcome them and accommodate them. Because they want to find that peace, they want to find that harmony, they want to have the safe place to live. It's through the higher order of law that we must create to make that happen. We've made that remark. We talked about the management of the Great Lake watershed. We said to the governments at that time, that was not too long ago, your law has no teeth. You must put teeth into your law so that the people can feel comfortable with it. And they'll die for it, as our people have died. Because what we cherish inside that law is the freedom of humanity.
Can we have a question over here?
Hi, ani bonjour. Sorry, I'm just learning my name in the Anishinaabe, but my native name is Rainbow Star Thundershower, and I'm from Circle River First Nation. And I'm with students. We're studying environmental technology and developing. And I have a question because I was thinking about this, and I was just wondering because it's a question of money, right? Like, I was thinking, what would happen if the government agrees and they give out these payments to the people in jail? Like all the incarcerated Anishinaabe people that we have right now. And then I started thinking, why would it, in your opinion, does it make sense to give a bunch of money to people that are still not well? Because I've heard when people were given money from the residential school, we lost a lot of people. We lost a lot of people because they weren't able to deal with what happened to them when they had that money. So it's like from being poor, not having nothing, to all of a sudden having a bunch of money. Like $1,000 is a lot to me. But I couldn't imagine having like 100,000. What would happen? And my question is, on a legal standpoint, for the people that are in legality, like, what will happen to the people that are incarcerated in jail? Would there be like a lot of people bailing themselves out because they have that money? Like, how do you think that'll affect the system, our system? But more importantly, do you think there's a way that we could, I don't want to say manage money, but is there a way that we could, as a collective, as a nation, put money aside for something more better, like a school or schools, instead of just like, here's like 50,000, here's 20,000? Like, in your opinion, as elders and as scholars and as people that know the law.
Maybe I'll start and then ask the rest of the panel to join in. But I think your question is two parts. Like one is the legal question, and then the other is like more of a social question. And on the legal question, I would think that you can't deny somebody what they're owed just because they're in jail. I'm not sure, maybe Stephen can talk more about that, but that's initially what I think. In terms of the social question of what do we do if there was some sort of award, and we don't even know what that might look like until like we get to stage 3 or through negotiations. But the idea is that it would be up to nations to determine what it is that we want to do amongst our nation, because what we want to do in Tikmikshing might be different than what Segmuk might be wanting to do, and it's a good idea to have those early discussions. But I really believe that our what makes us different is that we're collectives, and we look after each other, and that's what makes us different than the city of Sudbury, and that we can't lose sight of that, and we should be having those kinds of discussions about how do we collectively take care of each other, and what does that look like. And I think in every community it's going to be different, but there are definitely some lessons to be learned based on what you're saying happened with the residential school incident. Anybody else? Okay.
Just a little bit about the trust. When we put together the trust, we also put together for the consideration of the chiefs and the councils what we call compensation disbursement agreement. The reason we put that agreement forward is to suggest to the communities and to the court and to the Crown that we already know how we're going to distribute any monetary settlement that comes out of this. What we said at the trust is that it's not the responsibility of the trust to make decisions for the community. That's a community responsibility. All we said was that, in that agreement, was that we would use a process to divide the compensation from a claim, and it would be dispersed to the communities. Questions such as yours is, a very social question, and it's a difficult one. It's a difficult question to answer. I'm not qualified to make a determination of that, to answer a question like that. I'm not a chief. I'm not an MBA. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm not an elder, although I'm older than Art. But, I'm just speaking as a person. I think it's important for the communities to determine how they're going to do that. And I think it's important for all of the individuals in the community to assist in coming to an agreement on that. It's not up to us at the trust, the 21 trustees, to make that determination. Which?
Like, just to clarify, like, one of the reasons why I asked that was, like, if somebody goes to prison, let's say for a very horrific crime, which is, I'm just saying, like, molestation or something, and they get this money where they can be able to, like, bail themselves out, like, I'm just curious, like, is there gonna be something that's put in place to protect the communities from having a bunch of people come back, like, just because they have money? Not that they're well there, that they spend their time. Like, this is my question.
A legal question.
Those are pretty tough questions. Well, I don't know of any off the top of my head that a person that's incarcerated, there are certain things that your freedom might be restrained. We know you have a right to vote, at least under the rules of the Supreme Court of Canada. And I would think that one would think that if a person's incarcerated, there must be a means of maintaining and holding in trust and protecting and preserving a share for a person until they are not incarcerated. That's the first answer that comes to my mind. And I don't think I should really give any other answer around the compensation disbursement or the social issue, although they're very good questions, because I think the answer, ultimately comes from people. Bitch.
Maybe this is the last question, or maybe one more question.
Gil Shabanovic, I'm from Tikvik Nishnaldag, former chief of our community, as well as a former public servant within the federal government. My questions, there are two questions, and I hope I'm going to get those two questions in. And it relates to the information that is appearing on the news, in the newspaper, on the social media about the case and about some of the information that is being shared with us. And it seems to be rather confusing for us because not being part of the process, we don't understand what actually has transpired. And one of the issues that that comes to my mind is Ontario's role in the whole process, and the fact that Ontario has said that they reserve their right to appeal, yet I'll sit at the table and negotiate. I find that very concerning, because how can you negotiate in good faith and then decide that at the end of the day, well, geez, I'm going to appeal this decision because I don't like it. So I don't believe that is a fair process that the Ontario government has put forward to our Treaty of First Nations and the case itself. So I would expect that maybe I could get an answer from Honorable Stephen Mobile on that. Okay, and then I'll give you the second question I have. And the second question I have is in relation to me as a beneficiary. I am reading information, and I'm reading and seeing and hearing on the paper and in the social media about the case. I have yet to be consulted. I have yet to be told what's happening. I know that there was a meeting on Monday with the Huron Treaty people. And I just found out about it the last minute. Whether I would have gone or not it's not relevant. It's the fact that I was not aware of it. So I'm wondering if there's some discussions at the table with the Robinson Huron Treaty Committee about beginning some type of discussion with the beneficiaries. I have to come here to put my point forward, and that's not right. We should know at the First Nation level what's happening and how do we fit in? When are we going to be consulted? When are we going to be told what this claim is all about and how it's going to affect me as being an elder, but also my grandchildren who are 2 and 3 years old? So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, so there's the first question on the appeal and negotiations, and the second is beneficiaries. Okay.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to see you again. It's been a while since we've, actually hasn't been that long. It's not as far back as 1850. But I've heard a lot of people make the very same statement you have. They're very disappointed. So I won't speak on behalf of myself. I will just say I'm in the center of Robinson Huron Treaty territory. And I've heard disappointment about Ontario appealing. That's all I can respond to that. But I would say, because you asked, being a retired judge, there is a right of appeal under what we call the rules of civil procedure, the Courts of Justice Act, Ontario. That is a right. I don't think I can say anything other than that, but I've heard the kind of sentiment that you've expressed, and one thing I know, one thing I've learned is the Anishinaabe people of this territory are a very patient, considerate, respectful people.
And for the second question of beneficiaries, would anybody on the panel like to address that?
That's one of the biggest questions that the people were struggling with when the case was being put together. As we understand, in terms of what the Supreme Court says, this aspect of consultation. How do we inform our people? We don't have resources, we don't have programming available. And yet we want to engage, okay, we want to pursue. This is part of that fiduciary breach that we question in terms of Canada's working relationships with our nations. We're always in that seat of crying out for services, benefits, which we require. When we see the rest of the nation, go downtown Ottawa and look around here, and you see all these beautiful high-rise buildings, and we go to our communities up the north and we see the dilapidation, shacks that you would not want to have the people in them. But to get out of the cold, you go into these mold-infested dwellings. Your children become sick, they die. And you're told when you go to the meeting, we don't have money. When we go to Ottawa and see that big stone edifice that's going to be shut down for 10 years or 20 years of time to repair, how come we don't have any money to repair a home for a set of grandparents up in Stewart, up in Pekanjikam? Those questions are very much real for our people. And I recall going back when we were sitting down on the political news as chiefs and councils. All the chiefs would always say, I can't even begin to talk about education, health, and other kinds of programs. I've got to worry tomorrow about being able to put a loaf of bread for my baby. How do I do that when I don't have any means? Because our people have been hurt. That spirit inside has been murdered through this aspect of colonization. My children don't dream anymore. We see the high suicide rate among our children 9 years old, 8 years old, very young ages, where it's impossible to even contemplate the idea of suicide, and yet it's happening. What goes on there when we see those kinds of occurrences? That's when we look at this term, anomie, the social degradation of people. We don't even know to what extent that exists among our individual families and in our communities. And I was at a meeting out in Alberta and posed that question to the Canadian medical research people. We need to take a very close look at our families to try and get some kind of a numerical number which can quantify to what degree these kinds of conditions occur. Because that's the tragedy that we're going to have to address in terms of trying to find ways to bring our communities and people back to good health. It's where we want to go. It's what was intended in terms of an outcome, and allowing people to come in and take the resources and benefit from them. But in the process, we've been totally forgotten. So when we deal with Ontario, we see Ontario is a province. One of the Supreme Court cases just not long ago, Ontario was put into the picture of being in control of that land as an outcome of Confederation. Before they get control of that land, there's an obligation there, which is incumbent upon them to uphold. Section 109 was put there for a reason under the DNA Act. Great Britain said very clearly to Canada when it came into being, the agreements that I have made with you must be honored and upheld by Canada. That includes the provinces. The province can't run away and hide and say, I wasn't partner, it doesn't include me. I'm sorry, you're on the hook. You want to gain the benefit? You also have to pay the cost of the building. You're in my house. If you don't like it, then get out. Take your people and leave. That's what I told a man at one of our rallies. He put his head down and shimmy, walked away. That's the kind of road that we are in. We have to have that kind of idea in your mind about what to do. That comes from solid education, something which we control and participate in. Currently, that doesn't exist. I'm bringing it back, but it's a long way from there being present.
So I just want to say, about 20 after, so we're running a little bit late, but I want to reassure you, if you have other questions, the panel will be around for a little bit, 5, 10, 15 minutes. So please, we have a few refreshments at the table, some coffee and tea, I think, and water. And I know Sarah wants to, there's some gifts to give and recognitions to be made, and then Art will close the session for today. Change question.
Me, Butch, thanks so much for everyone for sticking around. I know we ran a little bit late here, so we do appreciate your patience. So I want to say a big chini Butch to the members of our panel and our moderator here. If we can give them a good hand. I just want to quickly mention that I put a sheet near the door there on the table. So I don't know what we're going to be having in the future in regards to this, but I didn't know that we were going to do this in October when we did our first panel. So if you're interested in getting an email from me for future public events from the Indigenous portfolio, then you can put your name and your email address over there, and I will let you know when we are having these types of events again. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and we post all of our events there as well. I just want to thank everyone who has joined us via live stream, and again, everyone in the audience here. I want to say Chimigwech to the University of Sudbury staff who helped to make the panel possible: Sylvie Renault, Sarah Noel, Felix, Halle Thoret, Marianne St. Denis, or Denise, Lynn Sear, Muriel Paquette, and the maintenance crew who set up for us, Pete, Wayne, and Richard. And we also have some small gifts for our panelists. And that's it. So Chimigwech to everybody for coming, and we really appreciate you participating with us. Thank you much.